Hey guys, it's Alex Youngblood. I've got Brian Haskins here with me,
How's it
and
going?
we're going to do another Tuesday, Thursday call and talk about today on different marketing approaches. That's a very important thing when you're considering getting into this business and trying to figure out where your marketing budget is and all that kind of good stuff. So, number one, how are you doing, Brian?
Good. You got it up live? I don't see it on Facebook yet, the video.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Alrighty. So
Okay. Just pop in.
yeah, I just wanted to make sure that way in case we had comments come in. But yeah, things are going good, man. How's it going with you?
Good, good. Um, Looks like we just lost you.
I'm here.
Yep, you're back. All right, cool. Yeah, no, going well. Um, yeah, this is the reason why this call is so important is because we talk about this with a lot of our students about they're trying to get started in the business. They're trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to figure out what marketing budget to use. And they don't know exactly, how to approach it, right? So basically there are three different approaches when we go into this, and we can really look at this from a geographic standpoint, right? So looking at it from number one, as a whole, as the county, and then we can filter it down into a zip and even down into a subdivision. And the cool thing about this business is that it is scalable based on your results or based upon based upon how you're performing, right? So the first level, I would say, for somebody who's just getting started is maybe like a subdivision level. So a subdivision, now in my area, now this could be different by you, and I'm not sure, but in my area, a subdivision is is a small development, could be 200, 300 homes, and they can range even from neighborhoods from the 50s and the 60s and so forth. And you can target that entire subdivision if it's a hot subdivision, and there are a lot of people that are wanting. There's a lot of renovations going on, flip activity, that kind of thing, right? And the reason why this is something that came up for me is because one time I was driving through a neighborhood. I was like, holy smokes, it looks like there's so much activity going on out here. There's a lot of different investors flipping houses and stuff like that. What if I could just get one house in this neighborhood? What would it take to do that, right? So what I did was I went to ListSource and I pulled the entire subdivision of the houses. I really even didn't filter based on I didn't filter based on anything really. I just sent to the entire subdivision because it was so small, and ended up getting a bunch of calls. And the cool thing is, from that marketing piece, I narrowed that marketing piece down to just that subdivision. So my marketing message actually said, I'm looking for houses to buy in this subdivision, right? And the subdivision in that situation was Pocahontas Village. That's what it was. I remember during that time. It was Pocahontas Village, and I said, I'm looking for a house to buy in Pocahontas Village. I really like this neighborhood, and I can pay you top dollar, that kind of thing, right? And because I approached it from that standpoint, I felt a little bit more real than somebody who might have just been blasting in the area. Have you ever done that marketing approach, or what's your feedback on that?
So when it comes to like my area, a lot of it, the way we don't have big neighborhoods like that very
No.
often. Sometimes we do. I mean, it just really depends, but especially like in our area where there's a lot of activities closer to like the city. So it's more broken up kind of by blocks and streets, and they vary so much. But I mean, the reason why that type of approach is so important is because really it's a lot different than what most people do. Most people kind of take a shotgun approach. So like whenever you're first starting out, and we talk about this a lot, it's kind of the old way or the old mindset of wholesaling is you really just kind of figure an area that you like, that you want to market in. You throw a bunch of stuff out there, whether it's bandit signs or Craigslist ads or postcards. You don't really look at who you're targeting. You just throw a bunch of marketing out there. And then once you find something that sticks, then try to go out and try to find a buyer for it. And kind of that's the old approach. Now, with this approach, the reason why it makes such a big difference is because maybe, you're your marketing is going to go a lot further. If you start out with a subdivision or something like that. So if you have a good marketing budget that's smaller, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, this is a really good approach. But for me, in my area, we kind of break it up a little bit differently. You can, in some areas, this would apply really well to a subdivision. But, for me, it might be just a real small pocket of houses or something like that kind of fit the criteria. But the same kind of methodology applies, if you're looking at a subdivision or if you have to search for it differently, but you're just kind of looking for a real small area that are similar in houses that way, because they're not all cookie cutter here. Like I know some of those big subdivisions are like that. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it depends on your area. I mean, if you guys are on here and paying attention, what do you guys have subdivisions in your neck of the woods, or do you have little cut up areas? Let us know, because I'm curious, because subdivisions in our area, we have a lot of them, and in fact, there's a lot of different ways, or there's a lot of different subdivisions. They're all built in a certain year. And they're all very similar houses. So, if you can get one house in there, I mean, there's like maybe a few different floor plans and that's it, because the builder went in there and did all that kind of development. And then he's like, okay, on to the next one kind of thing. And a lot of those are from like 1950 or 1950, 1960, 1970, even in the 80s and stuff like that. It's really cool to be able to target those because, they're just, what you're getting, and especially if it's a hot subdivision, it's really easy to target, and you've got your buyers that are pretty much built into the subdivision because you see all the renovations going on in the neighborhood. It's easy enough to find them. So so that's the first thing, either targeting a subdivision or a small pocket of houses. Now the next thing obviously applies to everybody, right? The next two, we've got going from a subdivision to either a zip code, and then obviously zip code level to the county, right? So why would we, or how would we pick a zip code, would you say, Brian, or why would we want to go zip code next thing, maybe after subdivision?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to, just like you said, kind of the targeting approach, I mean, really you're looking at where the kind of the demand is, so if there's a lot of demand at a subdivision that you can see, like you mentioned, there was a lot of people that looked like they were doing work on houses and wanting to buy those properties. That's a good indication of demand. But when it comes to zip code too, if you want to target a little bit bigger of an area, you want to go and pick the zip codes where there's a lot of demand, where there's a lot of either rehabs going on or rentals or wherever those buyers are buying those properties. That's kind of what you want to look for when it comes to a zip code, is kind of where the demand is for the investors.
Right. So zip code, what we always recommend that people do if they're just getting into this business is to go ahead and go to ListSource and then input the recent absentee buyers or recent absentee sales over the next 3 to 6 months, and go in and then see if you can identify some hot zip codes, and then usually you can market. Well, actually, you don't even need to buy the list, right? You can go in and you can see where ListSource will actually tell you what the number of the transactions are in those zip codes. And then by doing that, you can say, okay, these are the top 5 or these are the top 10 or whatever it is. And I'll give you another tip too, right? In these zip codes, you see a lot of activity, but sometimes a lot of those activity, some of those areas could be like war zones, right? So a really good way to test out that area or that list, if you will, is you could go in and find those zip codes and then go over to the checkout spot, and you can get a sample of the list, right? You usually get like 3 names or something like that, but you can actually go in, get a sample of that list for free, and then Google those addresses and then get an idea of what those type of houses are looking for in that area. So you can see if this is war zone or if these are nice, bread and butter style houses. You can check that out before you invest in buying a list in that area. So zip code is another good way to scale it from there. But then from there, you go from zip code to maybe multiple zip codes, because some counties are absolutely ginormous. In my area, most of our counties have like 7 zip codes maybe. What's it like in St. Louis? What do you got there?
Yeah, so it's kind of weird. I mean, we have a few major counties, but there are a lot of zip codes in each county. They're pretty big.
Yeah. So it is really important to narrow and home in on those zip codes because you can, I mean, you can really outspend yourself very, very quickly if you're not careful. And that's what people need to understand. When you're approaching it from this standpoint of a geographic standpoint and hitting everybody there, you really have to know what you're getting into. I mean, if you take a list of like 30,000 people, right? Is it going to be effective if you just hit 1,000 people?
Definitely not.
No, definitely not. That's why you need to narrow and find where that action is before you start targeting it and hitting it that way. Actually, looks like we've got some questions here. Who's asking?
Timothy has a question, not related to what we're talking about, but wants to know about virtual wholesaling.
Virtual wholesaling, good for you guys. I'm living in New York, going to South Carolina and do it, or maybe virtual New York market is hectic. Well, I mean, when we're talking virtual wholesaling, I mean, this is part of it too, right? If you're like in New York, for instance, and one of our students is in New York and she targets down into Memphis. And she started doing exactly what we said. You find the hot zip codes of where you want to start targeting, and then you start releasing the marketing in those areas and approaching it that way. So yeah, you definitely can from New York or wherever wholesale in another area, and doing exactly what we're talking about right here is a way to scale with virtual wholesaling. It 100% works. So no, that's a good question. So once you are then understanding what you've got going on in your market and say like from the zip code level, you can then scale it to the county level, right? And when you do that, now your list is going to get really, really big. So we recommend really homing in on that and narrowing that down to the most likely people that are likely to do a deal, right? So some people are like, okay, I'm going to hit this entire county, but I'm going to hit all the absentees in this county. Is that something we would recommend, Brian?
Absolutely not. No.
I mean,
unless you have an unlimited marketing budget.
Right. Because your absentees, everybody's hitting absentees. It's so easy to get, right? So hitting absentees is something that will eat your budget up very, very quickly. And you definitely have to be able to, you got to understand that if you're going to go the absentee route, it's going to take that much more to get into it, right? So that's, so what you want to do is you want to find a list of people within that entire county that's going to be the most likely to sell. We have a specific list that we recommend to our students that they do really, really well with. In fact, it's the first list that we recommend people do when they get into our program. We can't share exactly what it is here just because that wouldn't be fair to our students. But it's something by going in and going to ListSource. If you're in the county level and going that route with it, you've got to narrow it down to just more or to a tighter thing than just people that have equity. Because even then, equity is something that anybody can really get. So it's really important to understand this, right? Because this is how you scale, and this is how your business starts to grow, because you can't just make a living off of targeting one zip code or one area. It's going to need to grow. But if you grow strategically by going from a say even a subdivision to a zip code and then to an entire county. So, all right, let's see here. We've got some questions here. What was the question? Who said that?
So UI says, so after you get the top 5 hottest zip codes, how do you purchase a list for only those 5 zip codes? Is that even possible? Well,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's really simple to do inside of ListSource. 5 zip codes is a lot, depending on kind of what your budget is. We wouldn't really recommend 5 zip codes unless you have a pretty large budget. What dictates the zip codes is the size list that you're trying to purchase. So whenever you do your targeting, the first thing you want to do is start with maybe the first 2 or 3 zip codes, but you can have a list of maybe the top 10. Once you target it down and layer it down to what you want, if the size isn't big enough, that's whenever you add additional zip codes or additional neighborhoods or additional counties. All of it is to get you to whatever list size that you want. But inside of List Source, what you would do is you can target initially through geography. So it would be zip codes, area codes, counties, cities, whatever you want to narrow it down by. So once you enter in your zip codes, you would just be able to purchase that list of only those zip codes. So that's through List Source. I mean, depending on what you're using to buy your leads, you may not be able to, but if you go through List Source, you would be able to.
Yeah, you could definitely narrow it down through List Source. Very, very, very easily. I mean, it's just on the geography level. So yeah, you could definitely do that, and we would definitely recommend that. By going outside those hot zip codes, you're just going to stretch yourself too thin in the beginning when you're starting. And I mean, this doesn't only pertain to direct mail, right? Whether we're doing this through cold calling or direct mail, it all starts with the same thing. We have to get a good list. It's really, really key that you get a good list. And then you can take that list and then you can skip trace it, right? So, and we recommend everybody do that, because if you're mailing, a lot of these lists, even through ListSource and stuff like that, they're just based on the county records. So if somebody is living somewhere else, it's not necessarily reported to the county. They usually don't necessarily even change their address. But when you skip trace, you then can identify those people that are somewhere else, and they're not even going to get your mail. So that's really, really important too. And that's something we teach our students as well. When you skip trace, there's a way to find those people on there that would be receiving mail elsewhere, that if you didn't skip trace, you'd have no other way to find them. So skip tracing them so you'll get the best numbers for them and the best addresses for them. It starts with getting the right list, and then from getting that right list to skip trace, and then from there you say, okay, now I've got this list. Now what's the best way for me to work this list? You know, it could be say, okay, I'm going to mail everybody, then I'm going to call them, and then I'm going to RVM them type thing. You can approach it that way as well. So it's really important to set this up as a business, to set this up in a predictable format, right? A lot of people might just mail once, and then they're like, okay, I'm done. That didn't work, right? But you really have to approach this from a standpoint of, okay, here's my bulk list that I'm working with. What's the best way I can get in touch with everybody on this list, right? Everybody has mail, everybody has a phone number, and that's the way to reach people, right? So you can do that if you approach it from a strategic standpoint. So get a list and then start through that list, and whether that starts on the subdivision level or the zip level or the county level, either way, you've got to find out your hot areas first, and then move from there. So does anybody have any questions about what we talked about here with regarding those marketing approaches, and how you can best use those in your market? You know, whether it's virtual wholesaling or whether it's local marketing, whatever it is, let us know. We're here to help you with those questions.
Yeah. So another thing, just to kind of go
ahead
to a little bit more detail with that. So if you're looking at, I'll give you a few examples. So one of the questions you probably have if you're watching this is maybe, where do you start out at? Do you start in the subdivision level? Do you start at the zip code level or the county level? And the best way to kind of look at that is really going to base it on your budget. So for example, if we're doing, let's just use for example purposes, direct mail only. Okay. So we won't even consider any other marketing strategies. So let's say that you have a $500 a month budget for direct mail. Okay. So a $500 budget, if you use someone like Yellow Letter HQ, that's going to get you about 1,200 pieces per month that you can mail out. So it's a pretty small amount. So what you want to do is typically when it comes to direct mail, we like to remail maybe every 60 days the same list. So what you want to do is if you have 1,200 leads, but you're going to mail it every other month. So that means you would want to double that list size. So you're going to shoot for 2,400 records is kind of where you want to start out at. So with a $500 budget, you want to try to shoot for about 2,400 records. So whenever you're pulling your list, you can start out maybe at a subdivision level and see kind of what that gets you, the hottest subdivisions, or you can even go to a zip code level and kind of see from there. So if you're starting out less than $500, you're probably going to be kind of needing to focus on a really small area. Anything more than that, you're probably going to be looking at zip codes until you get to a pretty substantial budget. That's whenever you would be targeting, an entire county and stuff. But 9 times out of 10, the people that are just starting out aren't going to have that big of a budget to where they would target an entire county. So that just kind of gives you an idea from a marketing standpoint, kind of where you would want to start at, depending on kind of what your budget is.
Let's see. I'm trying to log into the
A couple questions we've got. Let's see.
Yeah.
Bob Thompson says, what type of list should you use to start, absentee owners or what? So when it comes to starting out with lists, what you want to look for is you want to look for lists in your area that are going to be not as competitive or not as oversaturated. So absentees, like we mentioned earlier, are probably the most oversaturated list, because what happens is lists that are very easy to get a hold of or lists that people recommend a lot, those are the things that every other new investor are going to start with. And the other thing you need to look at when it comes to your list as well, not only looking for leads that, are maybe harder to get, but you want to look for lists that, your competition maybe doesn't know about, or they don't want to put the work into it. Or the other thing is multiple points of motivation. So people that are very, very motivated. So just for example, with absentees, just because they're an absentee owner doesn't necessarily mean they are very motivated. So that's another thing to kind of consider. I mean, so whenever you're trying to pick a list in your area, go for something that, it's someone that's very motivated and someone that's not being targeted by lots of people. Those are two things to really consider.
Yeah, I see Rick Ginn on here. Good to see you, Rick, man. Everybody who's looking for probate advice, Rick Ginn's a really good spot to go with. He was the original creator of the handwritten postcard system that a lot of people are using and stuff like that. So go check out Rick Ginn if that type of thing interests you. So yeah, and honestly, that is, looking at absentee owners, just like you were talking about, that is one of the easiest lists to get started with. If all you can do is get an absentee list, I would definitely recommend that you cold call that list. If that's what you're limited to. I've honestly haven't been consistent with my marketing, but my market is hot. Working with a limited budget, I think that I should start virtually in a lesser targeted area and then come back and target my area with a bigger budget. Any thoughts? So, go ahead and post what market you're in. I'm just curious. Because every market's got competition in it, really.
It was a New York market, I think you mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah, well, New York is tough for sure. Just because it's like a attorney state and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff in there that.
So here's something to consider if you're thinking about virtual wholesaling. Okay, there's something to consider. It may be a less competitive market that you might go into, but you're going to have other things to consider as well. So there's going to be other challenges that you may run into, and you just have to kind of pick the lesser of two evils for yourself. It really is based on your own personal situation, but you figure that if you're going to do it virtually, you're not going to be able to necessarily go see those properties on your own. So you're probably going to have someone that you partner with. So you're going to try to find someone that you trust. There's a good chance you may have to either pay them or split your deal with them. So those are other things to kind of consider as well. It might be more difficult in your area, but there is a chance that, if you do it virtually, you're going to have other challenges as well. So you just have to kind of see what's
always challenges, right?
There is.
You choose,
and that's why.
And there's challenges either way.
Right.
So,
this business is hard. It really is, and that's why you can make so much money doing it, because there's a lot of people that just aren't willing to make the sacrifices and put the work in that it takes to do the business.
Yeah, it is what it is. You got to choose, pick your poison, as they say, right? Not trying to be negative, just trying to be real, right? It's tough. You got to figure out how to make it work. One of our students, in California is actually wholesaling virtually inside of North Carolina. And he was messaging me the other day, and he basically picked, he was kind of trying to do it the smaller marketing route, and he was trying to do the onesie, twosie type thing. But he just said, you know what? I'm going to take the bull by the horns. I'm going to run with this. And he dropped like 40,000 postcards, right? He started with 10,000. And it was a lower response rate than what he wanted and what he realized, right? And I'm going to give you a tip here too, right? You have to stop waiting to send your marketing, right? Because that first campaign is going to determine what you need to do and how you need to adjust, right? So for Alex, who was the student actually in this situation, he dropped first the 10,000 postcards, and he realized, you know what? I can handle the lead flow from this, and I'm going to just go ahead and drop the rest of them, right? So he dropped his other 30,000 postcards. And right now, and I'm looking through, let me look through his response here. He said that he's closing one Friday for 5,000, 2 more under contract today, potential 10 to 15,000 combined. A potential $30,000 to $40,000 lead came in today, went over contract with seller, waiting for signature. And he's got a potential commercial wholesale deal that he's trying to get under contract and negotiate with the sellers, right? That's a really successful marketing campaign, right? And he ponied up and he dropped the postcards. Now, if we're talking about this on a big scale like this, right? What does it cost to drop 30,000 postcards, right? 30,000 postcards times, what's that, like 30 cents?
Probably 30 cents per postcard at that level.
$9,000, right? So he dropped $9,000. He's already got 5 of it back. He's closing another one for 15. He's at 24, and he's got another $30,000 to $40,000 coming in, right? So if he makes, $60,000 off that, and he dropped $10,000, I mean, what's the return on that? It's a great return, right?
Right.
So he ponied up with it, right? So he's virtual. He decided, though, that, you know what? I want to speed things up. So he dropped all these postcards, and now he's he's reaping the benefits of it. However, he also realized that he's also the one that's taking all the calls. I think he's got a virtual assistant that's doing it, but he's the one that's talking to all the sellers, going back and forth and doing all this kind of thing. So now he realizes he's got to step out of his comfort zone and get a lead manager who's going to do that for him, or else he's just going to be running around like a chicken with his head cut off, right? So that's the challenge there. There are always challenges, whether you've got, there's little money challenges and there's big money challenges. It just depends on where you're at in life. So you're going to have those challenges. You just got to decide what you're going to do, what direction you're going to go in, and head in that direction, go in that direction, and start failing forward, like they say, right? You need, I'm guilty of it too, the paralysis of analysis. I sometimes sit there looking at a list and I'm trying to tweak it and find out what the little nuances are and all this kind of stuff. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if it stops me from getting the marketing out the door, whether it's a newer approach to marketing or the old faithful, I'm dead until I send out that marketing campaign. And you're not going to know until you get that marketing campaign going, whether it's mail or whether it's calling or whatever it is. You've got to get it going, so then that way you can start making adjustments to it along the way. You're just not going to know until you get it out the door, right? And when you're doing big marketing or small marketing, whatever it is, you have to be having follow-up processes to deal with the leads, right? You can get a ton of leads, but if you can't process those leads, well, you're wasting money at that point. So you got to find out where your ability is to handle those leads, and that starts with dropping that first marketing campaign. 5,000 postcards is a really good test to see how that's going. And here you have to understand this too, right? Right now, what we are seeing and what has been for the last few years in the marketing game, there's a 0.5% response rate on the marketing, right? 0.5%. That's what people are getting. And when you realize that, and you say, okay, I'm getting a half of a percent on the response rate. If I want to dominate that, I'm going to have to increase my marketing budget and then just blow past it, just like Alex did, right? Or you say, you know what? I can't afford the half of a percent of a response rate. So now I'm going to take my list and I'm going to cold call through it. And I'm going to approach this from a little bit different of a standpoint. Either way, you got to figure out what way you want to go with it and just go with it, right? You got to go with it. You got to get it going. There's that phrase. You don't got to get it right, but you got to get it going, right? So hopefully that's an encouragement to you guys, because that right there is the difference of this working or not. You can stand there and hope to get everything perfect, hope to have the perfect team, hope to have the perfect list, hope to have the perfect system, whatever it is. But if you don't do anything, you're not going to get anywhere. So that's really, really important. And this, just like I'm talking about right now, we've got our weekly coaching call coming up here, where we talk to our students and we see where they're at in their business on a weekly basis, and we try to make these adjustments along the way, whether it's somebody needing help with comparables on a particular property, or how do I find a buyer for this property, or what should I do? Here's my marketing numbers. What do I need tweaked and stuff like that, right? So I mean, that's all part of our implementation program, and all part of something that we look to help people with, because a lot of people are stuck and they just need that extra kick in the pants or that extra boost to get going with it. So Brian's going to post a link here for the implementation program that we have. And if it's something that you're interested in, you guys can simply apply for it, schedule a strategy session. We'll talk to you and see if it's a fit. If it is, great. If it's not, no big deal. But we're here to help you with that in our implementation program. And we're having a lot of students with some great success. Best ROI marketing strategy. So for me, mail is still really, really good. I mean, you just like I showed you with Alex, if he dropped, $10,000 in marketing and he's bringing in $60,000 from that, I mean, that's a great response, right? With cold calling, you have to understand this too, right? Again, and I like to say this, people need to understand what they're getting into. Because if you're going to cold call and you're just going to get this big ginormous list that has equity, and there's and it's just you that's going through that list, you're going by one by one by one by one by one. It's going to take you a long time to get through it. So if you're cold calling as just you really need to focus on narrowing that list down to find the best potential, starting with a smaller list and layering those lists together. I mean, that was another talk we had with one of our students today who was struggling. Somebody who's struggling, we take a little bit more intensive approach with them, and we try to find out what's going on in their business. I mean, we're talking to him today and trying to find out, hey, what's going on? Well, I mailed this list and it didn't work. Well, it turned out he didn't pull the correct list to start with. So we made that adjustment, and we helped with it, and we helped him with that, So yeah, again, you have to understand what you're getting into. So from a marketing standpoint, direct mail is you hit a bunch of people at once, and that's the approach there. Cold calling, you're really going to need to expand with a bunch of cold callers, like 5, 6, 7 cold callers, if you want to make a dent in an equity list. Other than that, you're going to need to narrow it down. If it's just you, you're going to narrow it down to some really motivating factors. And if you can get those and combine those together, you're going to have the fastest success with that. So
yeah, the best ROI for marketing, it's the one that you're going to do. It's the one that you're going to stick with and be consistent with it. I mean, there's going to be different sides of the coin. There's no real way to answer that other than the fact that it only works if you're willing to do it, and you're willing to do it very consistently and a lot. I mean, this is a numbers game. This business is a numbers game. If you're not seeing the results you want, pretty much all boils down to, are you talking to enough people, getting yourself in front of enough people, and kind of, so that's one thing to kind of keep in mind is, whatever is going to work best for you that you're going to be consistent with and do, that's going to give you the best ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So who's our mail house? What we've got is particular mail house we recommend to our students, Yellow Letter HQ, and we've got some discounted pricing that we offer through that. And you know what? That's something that we don't say enough, right? When people go and they order lists and they're just doing it straight off the street and they don't have the connections that we give our students, right then and there, you're going to spend the amount that it costs to be in our implementation program in the amount of data. I mean, not to mention the time that it goes to trying to figure things out and put things together and get things out the door. You know, time is something that compounds on itself. The more you don't do something, the worse it gets, and it just builds and builds and builds and builds. You know, like when you do a rehab project, right? If your plumber is late, or let's say your drywaller is late, well, that pushes off the paint people, and then that pushes off the flooring people, and that pushes off your finishing people and all that stuff, down and down the line it goes. Same thing in this business. When you don't get started, you're producing a compounding effect of nothingness that just keeps compounding on itself. So get started today, so that way you can get started and then make those tweaks as you go along. Somebody asked thoughts about hiring somebody from WeGoLook for about 100 instead of JVing with somebody for maybe half your profits, which could be 5,000. Yeah, WeGoLook is great. You could definitely JV with somebody from that. You just have to frame it properly with the seller. You have to make sure that they know exactly what's going on and that this person knows nothing else about real estate, but they're just there to take pictures solely in order to do that. So that's not a bad approach.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're going to be doing it virtually, you really need someone that's on the ground that you trust, someone that you can, have the confidence in, train them the way that you want. I mean, it is good, if you have someone go out there and just take the pictures and stuff. But if you're looking for someone that's going to take a more deeper approach and kind of help you out in that area, you may have to hire somebody. But even if you're giving up, some of your profits in the beginning, that at least means you're still making money. You're closing deals, so it's not always a bad thing to have to pay out, someone 50% of your profits.
Yeah, especially if they can facilitate it and make it happen. Absolutely. All right, let's see. All right, does anybody have any other questions regarding anything we just talked about? As well, you can click on that link that I sent you, or that we sent you, about the implementation program if you want a little more intensive approach and want to stop guessing. All right, let's see. Dwanell says, I pulled a list in ListSource and I have year built, I have the square footage, but my assessed value is off in my market. What other filters can I use? How do I find the average square foot in the top zip codes? The way you could do that is by pulling the list and then eyeballing it. One of the things we have our students is I have a property avatar generator, and you can upload your list into it and it'll tell you the averages on everything so that you can easily do it that way. But if you don't have that, you can simply go in and eyeball it and try to group it together and see what that percent or what those percentages are. If you don't have assessed value, what other filters can you use? Let's see. So year built, square footage, assessed value is off. I'm trying to think. You got a thought there on that one, Brian?
I was just responding to a couple comments. I mean, it depends on what your goal is. I mean, if you're trying to find, the motivated sellers in there, I mean, that's not really going to give you much motivation.
He's doing the cash value. I think he's trying to build a property avatar.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Last market sale price, that might work. Let's see. But yeah, finding the average square footage in the top zip codes. If you're talking price per square foot, right? So if you're talking about price per square foot, that you would find by simply finding what the price of the property is and then dividing it by the square footage, and then you could kind of see it that way. Quick tips on how many lists and how to go about planning a mailing campaign with about 3,000 to spend. I mean, that's a decent budget. 3,000 to spend. We would definitely recommend one list to start out with. Are the first list we recommend to our students. They've got some great success with that.
Yeah, if you're interested, Micah, just go to that link, and then you can fill out a questionnaire, and we can set up a one-on-one call with you. We can show you our process, kind of our approach, and then if it's something that you want to do, we can talk about mentoring and getting it all set up for you. But yeah, with a budget like that, there's a few things that we would recommend as far as the strategies, but to one really specific list to help get you on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to do it, if you're not doing it the list source way, is to try to get your tax delinquent lists and code violation type stuff, and then setting those up. I always recommend people. It's funny, people get, like, for instance, even a probate list, let's say, right? If you can get a probate list and then build it cumulatively, it's funny. A lot of people, what they do is they send out like a probate list and they send it out once and then they put it to the side, right? And then they get the next month and they send it out and they put it to the side. And then they get the next month and they send it out and put it to the side. You run a cumulative list, right? And it just keeps building and building and building and building. So send out your marketing, like let's say it's a probate list that you can get from going to the courthouse and stuff like that. Get a list, send it out, and then keep a cumulative list that you send out as well. So make sure you mail out every month, and then I would take that list every quarter and that cumulative list and send that out. So that's a really easy way to think about it. Every month and then every quarter cumulatively. And then that list will get bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes, just by nature, as you gather your records. And you could do that code violation. You could do that. That's another list that keeps adding on itself. Like a tax delinquent list doesn't change that much. It's not that fluid. But code violation, probate, those are things that just get bigger as they go. So take advantage of that and have your monthly list and then cumulative list and run it that way. And that's if you're not using, doing like a list source route. Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? Doesn't Tom Kroll say week 1 tax delinquent, high equity week 3, probate week 4, code violation, then repeat? I'm not actually sure what he says on that one, but I mean, you could set that up however you want. But
it all boils down to consistency. I mean, if you're going to do those and repeat them, I mean, those are, I mean, there's a couple differences in that. I mean, obviously it's a lot different than what we recommend and what we do. It just really depends if that's what you want to do. I mean, some people can easily get access to all those in their area. Other people can't.
Yeah. And it stops people from getting started if you don't have those lists, or you don't feel like you have the
right. And the other thing with those lists as well is that you probably aren't going to necessarily see the best results mailing them separately, but by combining certain ones of those, you may see much better results. But I mean, again, it's really all about taking action and doing that kind of stuff. So it really just kind of depends.
All right. So people are asking about what the cost is. There's actually, it's not one cost. So it just depends on where you're at. That's something where we've got to use.
Yeah, we have a couple options. So, like we do a few different things. So we just kind of look at your situation, see kind of what you need help with, talk it over with you, and then kind of go from there. But it's definitely affordable. It's a real small mentoring group. So we typically mentor about 10 to 15 people at a time.
Yeah, no problem, Micah. Let's see. When you mail probates, do you send to the home address or the petitioner or the property or both? So probates, you want to mail to the executor. You can, if you want, you can mail to the heirs and stuff like that. But again, keep it simple, because the more simpler it is, the easier it is to implement, and the easier to implement is, the faster you'll do it, right? So send out to the executor. Absolutely. And then you might want to call the executor as well. Let's see how many cold callers you have making calls. All right.
Also, so as many as you can afford,
Yeah, as many as you can afford, right? So the interesting thing with that is, if you're going, what I've found, right, is I'm my best cold caller, right? but it doesn't pay for me to sit on the phone all day and be making calls, right? So the next best option is another another fellow American, right? So they may not be as good as I am, but two of them is potentially as good as I am, right? So the next option, though, on that is you've got two cold callers that you're spending, say, like $12 an hour or $15 an hour, whatever you're paying them, is the virtual route. And if you go the virtual route, you're probably going to need double that amount, which is at least 4 to equivocate the 2 that are cold calling, right? So that's kind of how you have to look at it, is on how that's going to work. And budget wise, it works that way too, because you could be paying $4 or $5 an hour for these other callers, right? But if you need 2 of them to equivocate the 1, and then 4 to equivocate the 2, you could do the math on that and see how that works. I mean, I've had the best luck with cold callers that are local, virtual. They do their thing. What I would recommend here too is this, right? If you've got a hot list, like a tax or a code violation or something like that, send your best prospectors through those hot lists. Then, if you then you're expanding from there, send your more virtual people on the bulk lists that they're just going to sit there and pound through. And then what you do is you have your follow-up caller go back and see what the motivation is, right? Because a lot of people will say, yeah, sure, I want to sell my house. But when you have then another caller come in there and then verify it, find out what the real motivation is, if they have a price and what their time frame is, then you've got a bona fide lead. Because I found that the bulk lists, they produce a lot of leads, but it takes a lot of manpower to go through them, because everybody wants to sell, right?
Hannah wants to know if we're worried about a changing market. We've been doing this for lots of different kinds of markets. I mean, when we first got into the business, it was kind of before the first crash. I mean, the market was on fire, I mean, and
like 2004, 2006. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, wholesaling works no matter what kind of market. Obviously, strategies change. There's going to be a heck of a lot less people and saturation in the market. If something does change, it'll weed people out. But, I mean, it's one of those things that it works. You just have to kind of change some of your approaches, but you can wholesale no matter what.
Jimbo says, I have Freedom Voice for my seller line. Freedom Voice. Wow, that's original. And Google for my buyer line. Should I drop these 2 and get the multiple phone lines you recommend in the week 1 training? I guess he's talking about CallRail is what I.
Yeah. So Jim's one of our mentoring students. And one of the things we do for sure is with CallRail. It allows you to have the multiple phone lines that you can use. Not really sure what you're doing for the buyer line though. But yeah, if you're going to be doing multiple types of marketing, CallRail is a great option for you to kind of track those things in a real simple format.
Yeah.
So CallRail, essentially, it drives everything to one phone number, but they give you different phone numbers to use for your marketing pieces. So that way it just kind of automatically tracks where those calls are coming from. Makes it a lot easier for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. All right. Any other questions with regards to anything? Or wow, almost an hour. Amazing. Time goes fast when you're having fun, right?
Right.
But if there are no more questions, guys, check out that link, schedule a strategy session, see if it's something we can help you with. Is it going to be available later to re-listen again? Yeah. This will be posted in the group, and you can check it out as much as you want. And go ahead and schedule a strategy session, see if we can help you. And we'll look forward to doing this again next week. So, guys, show up next week, Tuesday at 1 o'clock, Thursday at 1 o'clock. Be waiting for that. We give the best information we possibly can. You can go ahead and post questions as well to see if we can help you with advice along those lines. And we'll see you guys later.
Thanks.